I would like to take a moment before we get into today's main episode and to talk about my sponsor for the podcast. Podmatch is a new podcasting site dedicated to all podcasters. The platform helps hosts get connected with potential guests to appear on their show, as well as allow guests to find podcasts that will give them a chance to share their story. Podmatch offers many tools to help organize your page, from to-do lists to episode planning to potentially appearing on a leaderboard. Podmatch has it all. The best part, you have the potential to get paid. And who doesn't like to get paid from home? I like to. With an easy sign up, you can start connecting with podcasters and guests immediately. I have been a part of Podmatch since the beginning of May, and I have got to say that it was the best decision I've ever made because Podmatch helps your podcast grow. It helps you get connected with people that have very interesting, very compelling background stories that are just waiting for their story to be shared. So if you are a host or guest and would like to start building professional relationships, explore more opportunities, and have your story shared, I highly suggest that you sign up with Podmatch today by going to joinpodmatch.com/lethal venom to start expanding your network in seconds. I would like to give another huge thank you to Podmatch for sponsoring this episode. Now on to our main episode, and again, you can sign up at joinpodmatch.com/lethal venom to begin your podcasting journey today. Hello everyone, welcome to the Lethal Venom Podcast, the show where I talk about anything I want with the honest to God truth, no lies told. Today's guest is a very compelling, entertaining, and high-energy storyteller whose passionate perspective draws listeners in from the very first word. He's the host of the When You Look podcast, where he does a deep insights meets captivating conversations. So, give a huge welcome to Mick. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I cannot wait to hear this very compelling story.
Yeah, Noah, thanks a bunch for having me, man. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
As I've said this beforehand, I am dealing with a throat problem, so this will probably be a recurring thing that you hear in the upcoming episodes that I have going on, but I'm trying to drink hot tea and I took the spoon out so it doesn't clink everywhere. So, but so feel free to introduce yourself and kind of tell me a little bit about what growing up was like for you, Nick.
Yeah. Well, no, again, thanks a bunch for having me on. As you had mentioned, here in 2025 and beyond, I host the When You Look show, which is a podcast where ordinary people are sharing their extraordinary experiences. And then the listener gets to decide, was it coincidence or God? But long before that, I was born in Baltimore, Maryland. And I was growing up in what most would consider to be a Christian household. And I went to Christian based education from first grade through 12th grade. And as soon as I possibly could, Noah, I moved from Maryland to Colorado. And there was a big reason for that. And that was that while I knew my parents loved me, we didn't have a great relationship. And they had a lot of rules and they had a lot of discipline. And some of your listeners may be familiar with the phrase that goes, rules without relationship equals rebellion. And I fully exemplified that. So I rebelled really hard as a teenager. And as soon as I graduated high school, I moved to Colorado with the full intent to get as far as I reasonably could away from my folks. And I really enjoyed the outdoors. I was in an outdoor program in high school. So I spent a fair bit of time in the backcountry, many weekends a month and in between. And so Colorado was a bit of a natural fit. And I was a 6 foot tall boy. Okay. I don't even want to go so far as to call myself an adult or a man because my definitions of those now really do not match what I was as an 18-year-old when I moved to Colorado. But the deal in the Wienholt family that I grew up in was mom and dad will get you through 12th grade, and then you pay your way from that point forward in terms of education. So I took a year off and established residency in Colorado, and then began going to college when I was 19. And I was fueled 100%, Noah, by ego and pride. So I had done a number of the 14,000 foot peaks in Colorado over that year or so that I had been there. And two of them that are very, very popular because they're just outside of the greater Denver area. They're pretty easy to access. There's Gray's and Torrey's Peak. And they're two 14,000 foot peaks. They have really easy trails to get to the top, and people just, get to the trailhead, walk all the way to the 14,000 foot peak, drop down into a saddle in between, and then go up to the other one and then walk all the way back. And I had done that myself and had a whole lot of fun doing it. But since everybody does it that way, Noah, and my pride and ego fueled me, I needed to do something different. And better said, I really needed to do something better, harder, cooler, whatever type of adjective we're going to put on that. And so I came up with the idea that the next time the winter conditions came around, that I was going to climb one of the coolars on Gray's Peak. And so a couloir is kind of like the chute at the top of a ski resort that people would ski or snowboard down, like a double black or triple black diamond, like that type of thing, like that narrow chute. And so my intention was to go climb the Lost Rat Couloir on Gray's Peak. And this is now November of 2000. And November in the mountains of Colorado looks like a winter wonderland because everything is covered in snow. But it's really only been snowing for about a month there. So everything's beautiful. Everything is white. It's all snow covered, but there's nowhere even close to being enough snow for the snow itself to be stable. So it's a terrible time to be in the backcountry to do anything other than take some photographs, basically. You really should not be around the snow at all. But I didn't know that. And even if I did, wouldn't have mattered. Because my ego was saying, go do something cool, go do something different, go do something that that other people don't do very regularly. So November 7th, 2000, some of your listeners may recall that was a really big day for voting in the U.S. That was the day of the hanging Chad. It was the election day of George W. Bush and Al Gore. And that also means it's a Tuesday. So I didn't have work that day. I went up to the mountains, got to the trailhead. The plan was to cruise quickly up the trail and then get to the base of the climb, which ultimately I ended up doing, and then begin to ascend the climb, go all the way up to the top of the couloir, get on the ridge, go to the summit of Gray's Peak, go over to the summit of Torrey's Peak, come down the standard trail, and be home by dinner. Easy peasy was sort of the idea. Well, the base of that climb, Noah, starts around 12,800 feet. I start up the climb, and so that everybody is clear and can perhaps visualize this, think of a really steep ski slope, okay, to the point where it's not vertical. This isn't like a vertical type of climb. We're not talking about ice climbing or something along those lines, but we're talking about very, very steep snow to the point where you're well beyond hiking. You need to use your hands and your feet to help you ascend and to help you have stability as you are ascending. Okay. So I'm approximately 200 feet up this route. I am approaching about 13,000 feet on the mountain, and I hear this very distinctive whoomph sound. I had done enough reading, had spent enough time in the backcountry, was very familiar with what that sound meant. And it is the quintessential sound that defines the fracture and the beginning of an avalanche. So I looked up as soon as I heard the woof, meaning looked up the hill, basically up the mountain, saw the fracture line, and knew immediately what had happened and who had caused it, which was me. Okay, because I'm the only person around climbing by myself. There's nobody else on the slope. And I immediately then attempt to, instead of going up the mountain, I immediately attempt to move perpendicular to the slope. Okay. Which, when you can imagine, if you're climbing essentially using hands and feet, isn't exactly the easiest thing. So I turned to my left. I got one step in that direction and was immediately swept off of my feet. And I remember thinking to myself very distinctly, this is going to suck for my family, especially my mom. And then the lights went out. So I regained consciousness at the bottom. No idea how long I was unconscious. And as mentioned, okay, we're in this winter wonderland. There's snow. All looks very beautiful, but there's not enough snow for things to be stable. Well, that was beneficial in some ways, not helpful in other ways. And what I mean by that is that there wasn't enough snow for me to be buried. So I didn't have to dig out in any way. But because there wasn't a lot of snow, that meant that the rocks that the mountain is made of were very present on my way down, which is actually part of why I was knocked unconscious almost immediately. So I was climbing without a helmet, which of course is a huge no-no and not something that I typically did. I normally climbed with a helmet, but I had gotten to the trailhead parking lot and only then, being approximately an hour and 45 minutes or so away from my house, realized I had forgotten it. And I made the distinct decision to climb without it. And I remember telling myself in the parking lot, you're just climbing on snow. It'll be fine. It turns out that wasn't the case. So I regained consciousness at the bottom. I hiked the 3 miles back to the trailhead parking lot, which took likely somewhere between 75 and 90 minutes. That's my best estimation based on the fact that I know my normal rates of travel. Some of it was off trail, some of it was on trail. Once I got back onto the trail, I moved at a relatively reasonable pace, and it's all slightly downhill when you're on trail. So I get back to the trailhead parking lot, and on the way, once I had regained consciousness, I did an initial assessment of myself, and I knew something was wrong. But no, I really had no idea what was wrong. Like, truly just no awareness of the extent of my injuries. I was climbing with 2 ice tools, which are short versions of ice axes for your audience, if they can think of that. Think of someone ice climbing. Okay, I was not ice climbing. This is snow climbing. But on steeper snow, a lot of times you will use a technical ice tool. So I had both of those in my hands. They were leashed or lashed to my wrists, and both of those were gone when I regained consciousness at the bottom. I also had 2 ski poles that were in my backpack that I was climbing with, and one of those was missing. So all I had essentially when I regained consciousness was the single ski pole, which I used to help me hike my way back through the deep snow and then eventually get on the trail and move back down to the parking lot. So on the way back, particularly once I got on the trail and travel got a little bit easier, I was able to, at least I have memories of what I was experiencing. And I remember spitting a lot of blood. I knew something was wrong with my mouth, but I had no idea what it was. certainly not normal to be spitting blood.
Mm.
And I had blood that would continue to drip into my right eye. And no, it was super weird because every time I would go to wipe it, it just made it worse. So I had to make this conscious decision of just let it drip, which was really uncomfortable, frankly, but it got worse every time I touched it. So, and I had no idea what was causing that, but I had blood continually dripping into my right eye. So I get back to the parking lot. My plan this entire time is to get to my pickup truck, get in my pickup truck, drive myself to the hospital. The reason that that was my plan is because in high school, a handful of years before, I was mountain biking. This is not in Colorado, but same type of thing. I was deep in the backcountry, mountain biking by myself. I crashed my mountain bike, split my knee open. Not a life-threatening type of thing, but enough that I couldn't use that leg. So I had to pedal with one leg all the way back to my car. And I got in my car and drove to the hospital, and they stitched me up and I went on with my life. So I had that experience in me, and I'm thinking, I'll just sort of apply the same thing. I'll get back to the car, I'll get in the car, drive to the hospital, they'll fix me up, I'll go back to normal. Well, when I arrived in the parking lot, there was a guy standing at the trailhead sign. And I looked at him briefly. I'm kind of on a mission, get to my car, get in my car, take the pickup truck to the hospital. And he looks at me, and then he comes over to me as I'm walking towards my truck, and he says, "What happened to you?" And I responded, I was like, "I was in an avalanche." And we're, of course, complete strangers. There's, nobody around otherwise, and certainly just the two of us. And he continued to follow me as I went to my truck. And he kept asking me all of these different questions. What happened, asked me multiple times, all this type of stuff. And frankly, he was pretty annoying because I was on a mission to get in my truck and to go. And he was asking me all of these questions. Well, it turns out, as he and I have talked, subsequent to all of this, he was really trying to understand what had happened to me and were there other climbers that were injured and or stranded. And because most people don't climb by themselves, right? It's pretty normal. You take a buddy for all kinds of different things in life. Not me. I had to do it different. I had to do it cool. And, it was a terrible mistake. So the practice that I had was I always locked my keys in my pickup truck because I kept underneath the pickup truck bed a spare key bolted to the frame of the truck. And the idea for this, just so that people don't think I'm too crazy, is that if you lose your backpack for some crazy reason when you're in the backcountry, but you can make it back to your vehicle, if your keys are in your backpack, you're stranded. But if you're able to get access to your vehicle because your keys are on and in your vehicle, then you can always get out even if you've lost your pack. So I get to my vehicle and I need to climb underneath and get the key. And I didn't have the strength to do that. So I had to ask this guy, Steve, "Hey, can you get the key for me?" Which is frankly a big blow to my ego because I didn't really want to have to ask anybody for help. And so he climbs underneath, finds the key, gives it to me. And of course, I'm trying to get into my vehicle, but I'm also wanting to get access to my vehicle because it has my thick and warm down jacket. And we are now late in the afternoon here on Tuesday, November 7th of 2000. The sun is still up, but it has dipped below the ridge of the mountains. So the entire parking lot is in the shade and shadows, and it's cold. So I'm trying to get into my car to get my jacket on and, of course, drive to the hospital. And Steve gets the key off. We open the vehicle up and I can't get my ski or my shell or my rain jacket, however you want to think of it. I can't get my Arc'teryx shell jacket off. And I can't get it off for two reasons. The first of which is there is so much coagulated and frozen blood all over the front of my jacket that the zipper is stuck. And the second thing is that even though I considered myself a strong, athletic, quote unquote man, I didn't even have the strength to get the zipper down. That's the kind of condition that I was in. So here I have to look at this complete stranger and say to him, can you help me get my jacket off? So I go from hours before, I'm going to go crush this. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to have this amazing day. It's analogous to like, I'm up to bat and I'm going to hit a grand slam. Like, I'm not even going to hit a home run. You know what I mean? Like, this is going to be huge, all the way to asking a complete stranger, can you take my jacket off? Can you help me get my jacket off? So with Steve's help, we ended up breaking the zipper in order to get it off. And throughout the course of this few minutes of interaction with Steve, he continues to ask me if he can take me to the hospital. And I continued to tell him no. I'm like, I'm good. He continued to ask. And when I couldn't get the jacket off, it was pretty clear to me that I needed help. So I relented and I let Steve take me to the hospital. So here's the deal. I know for a fact that if Steve wasn't there, I would have very likely died in the parking lot. If I was able to get in my pickup truck, I would have died in the truck on the road, the 3 miles of fire road back down to Interstate 70. No question. For sure, I should have and would have died in that parking lot as far as I'm concerned. The fact that Steve was there is 1,000% a miracle, because in the conversations that I've had with him, he has told me very plainly he had no reason to be there. He had no reason to get off of Interstate 70 and drive 3 miles up a snow-covered dirt road. But he did. And he arrived at the Grays Peak Trailhead parking lot 30 seconds before I walked into it. So he rushes me to the hospital, which the closest one there was just outside of Breckenridge in a town called Frisco, to the Frisco Medical Center. Not Frisco Medical Center. It's the Summit Medical Center in Frisco. And they are a medical center. They are not a hospital. So my degree of trauma was well beyond them. And I'll define that trauma here in just a second. And then as a result of that, they were going to flight for life me from there down to Denver. As it was told to me, because the weather was not good for the helicopter, I was rushed down in an ambulance. And it was a major, I think it was St. Anthony's Central Hospital in Denver, where all the King's men basically put Humpty Dumpty back together again. But here's how bad I was cracked up. I had a pretty bad bruise on my hip, which is the thing that I complained most about, which is ironic based on what I'm going to describe for you. My skull was broken in 3 places. My jaw was broken on both sides. All of the impacts that my head took created significant swelling and bleeding of my brain in my brain. So at the hospital, they had to cut a triangular shaped piece of my skull out to mechanically relieve the pressure and to drain the blood and other fluids. And then they installed a drain. I literally have photos of me with a clear tube and a bag kind of filling up with my own blood coming out of my head, literally out of the side of my head. As a result of the skull fractures, which was the rear plates in my head getting shoved forward, those ended up pinching the auditory nerve in my left ear. And so I completely lost hearing in my left ear. That subsequently returned to approximately 70% after a month or so. So I've diminished hearing in my left ear. And then I mentioned before on that walk back when I'm on the trail and I got that blood dripping into my right eye. Well, just above my right eyebrow, all the way to the back top of my head, like right where your skull basically would start to go down towards your neck when your head makes that turn. From the eyebrow to that point, I was completely split open all the way to the skull. No skull fracture along that line, though, which was kind of interesting. But what Steve described was he said, when we took your hood off, because I'm climbing in a Gore-Tex rain shell type of jacket with my hood up, when we took your jacket off and your hood off at that point when we're in the parking lot, he said your ear was, for all intents and purposes, basically sitting on your shoulder. So that gives you a sense for like how big the split was and how complete the split was, because this wasn't just a cut. This was truly all the way down to my skull. So they put all that back together. 3 days in intensive care. The brain surgery that I talked about was emergency surgery. They didn't go into it with that intention, of course, but they ultimately had to cut me open, drain it, and put all that back together. And after a total of 6 days in the hospital, I left, and my jaw was reconstructed or put, essentially put back together, titanium plates, that type of thing. And it was wired shut for 17 days. And that was that, man. I was I was humbled a little bit, but not a ton. And that's really sad. So let me just pause there, man.
I think that a very it's a very impactful story. When you had gone to the hospital, the doctors expect you to make any kind of recovery or bounce back from it. What was the doctor's prognosis? Were they think that you were going to die from the conditions and injuries you had?
Great question, dude. I don't have a lot of insight into that because so much of what occurred really quickly. Here's what I mean. By Tuesday evening, I'm at the actual trauma center. I'm in Denver now. Okay. That night, I undergo that emergency surgery. So, I mean, this all happened very, very quickly. After that, there was never any discussion with me, and none of the family members that ultimately came from Maryland or Colorado that were present with me in the hospital communicated any of that. So I think once I made it out of surgery, there wasn't any expectation that I was not going to make it. But it really became more of what's recovery going to be, particularly in terms of mental capacity, because a term that wasn't used 25 years ago was traumatic brain injury or TBI. And that's a much more common terminology that's used now because of so many of our servicemen and women that have had TBIs in the military. So, the conversations were mostly around rehabbing me mentally, and I don't think anybody really had a great idea of how long that was going to take.
Did you have any, or have you had any lasting side effects from it? Like, I know you had said that you had completely lost your hearing in your left ear, but it came back to be 70%. Do you have any other lasting effects when it comes to the injuries that have really affected you to this day?
Yeah. So you're right about the hearing. Thank you for recounting that. The biggest one is actually something no one can see. And it is that the vocabulary that I had going into that accident, all of it is there. I just can't access it as quickly. So I've had people say to me throughout my professional career, they're like, man, you're a really thoughtful communicator. And I chuckle because I'm like, that's funny. It's just that I couldn't get the word out. I literally know I have the word and I have this sort of like visual of a Rolodex, and I'm having to crank through the Rolodex to get to the word, and then I get it, and then I can get it to come out of my mouth. And I didn't have any of that prior to the actual brain injury. So no one can see it, but it is continually present with me.
What was the so after the accident, what kind of did you do with life after that? Did this accident kind of made you not want to well, let me back up a little. So when the avalanche happened, did they ever send like a report saying that there was an avalanche that had been reported in the area? Was there like a um, because I feel like at a point like that, they would have some kind of security guard there or someone that specializes in avalanche rescues. Was there ever like an alert that went out saying that an avalanche had occurred?
Yeah, good question. So, not that I am aware of specifically, but let me give you a little bit more context to that. There is a avalanche monitoring group in Colorado. I don't know the top of the or off the top of my head, I don't remember the name for it, but they monitor all of that stuff all the time. The slide that I was in was a relatively small slide, but
Mm,
enough to do its damage per se.
right.
But, and here's the big but, this is what they told me, and that was you would have made the news if it weren't for the election because you were the first avalanche victim of the 2000-2001 winter season. But because it was that really big day of the hanging Chad, and even if it wasn't that, I mean, it was election night. So that typically consumes all the news for that night anyway. But yeah, they specifically told me, they're like, yeah, you were the first, you would have made, made the news, but you didn't because of the election. And I just remember that kind of getting a chuckle out of that back then. It's like not exactly the way you want to make the news, you know? So
Did you have any news outlets like days after the event reach out and want to do like a news report? No.
no. And I think perhaps it was probably some of the election hangover there. I mean, so, that
Hmm.
November 7th or that 2000 election, I mean, that drug on for days and went all the way through to the Supreme Court, ultimately deciding, that it was going to be George W. Bush. So I think that's really what dominated the news cycles.
Do you have kind of a sense of relief that it didn't make the news, or are you kind of glad that it didn't really get a lot of attention? Because I feel like if I was in an avalanche, I would not want that story on the news because I wouldn't want people to know who it was and what caused it. But at the same time, I would want it so that people can learn from it. Um, what have you learned from the accident? Has it made you kind of scared to go climbing and hiking on the mountains again? Have you been snow climbing again since?
Yeah, great series of questions there. So I think in hindsight, it's wonderful that I didn't make the news because it's very likely, especially you and your journalism background, they would have asked me questions like what you just did, which is, what did you learn from this? And I legitimately would have had no good answer. None. And that's terrible. So did I learn some things? Yes, absolutely. Once bitten, twice shy, as the saying goes. So I was much more tentative in the mountains. I went to avalanche training classes after that. I got much more snow aware. And I still ultimately did a bunch of ice climbing, a bunch of snow climbing, and other things, but with the right education relative to the objective, what I was planning to do, basically. But in terms of real life, I didn't really learn a lot. And that's terrible. It also kind of foreshadows a little bit of later in life, some stuff that I think we'll talk about here in a couple of minutes. But my mother would ask me every once in a while, post the avalanche, God saved you. What did he save you for? And my response was basically like, I don't know. And that was true. Like I didn't know. But at that point in my life, I barely understood that he had saved me. Now, I knew that it was a miracle that Steve was there, like no question about that. Steve shouldn't have been there. I knew that. I knew it was a miracle, but I never really understood, I guess, the gravity of that. And maybe a better way to even say it is I didn't even want to, I guess, or maybe I didn't even have the capacity for it. I'm not trying to let myself off the hook here. I'm just simply saying I didn't have any relationship with God. So giving him all of the due and proper credit, I think was a bit of an impossibility for me. And it was only once I had a relationship with God that I could really see what he did and then be over the moon grateful for it.
I know earlier we had mentioned kind of you wasn't really close with your family, you kind of had a strained relationship with them. Did this accident ha- actually, by some chance, bring you and your family closer to where you had a better relationship?
No, not particularly. My folks were in Maryland, as were my sisters. So I continued to live in Colorado, 1,800 miles away. My brother lived in Colorado. So I overall had a really wonderful relationship with him. But in general, I was still, despite the avalanche, right? If my ego went from somewhere between on a scale of 10, 9, 10, or 11 on most days, it probably dropped down to like a 7, 8, or a 9 on most days. You know what I mean? I didn't become a different person. And I really wish that I did, but I didn't.
And then my listeners think that that might be a tragic story, but the next story that has happened to him, I think it's more tragic, and every parent doesn't want to wish on it. Is tell me a little bit about um your son Luke, what kind of happened with him.
Yeah. So the avalanche is in 2000. I meet the woman who becomes my wife in 2002. We get married in 2006, and our intention was to be married without children for a handful of years, like on purpose.
Mhm.
And then when it became time for us to start a family, we got pregnant right away. And at this point, we're actually back living in Colorado. So I had moved once I met the woman who's now my wife. She was in Maryland. I met her in Maryland. I moved from Colorado back to Maryland in 2002, but we moved to Colorado in 2007. So we're in Colorado, we're pregnant, and all was sort of going to plan. We were planning to start a family. We got pregnant. It looked like it was all going to our plan or going along with our particular plan. Um, I can remember having a conversation with the obstetrician at one of the last visits. So in the first pregnancy, I was, involved towards the beginning with those OB appointments and then towards the end, but I didn't go to all of them, and there was really no reason for me to do that. But I remember asking the obstetrician, I was like, "Hey, is there anything else like that we need to be aware of or doing, or what's kind of your overall assessment here?" And I remember her saying to me, "You're good," meaning my wife, like she's good. And then she said this. She said, "Your wife should be on the cover of Fit Pregnancy magazine." And her language there was really just to say, like, everything's good. And of course, being a guy who had a pretty big ego, that's a pretty cool thing to hear. You know what I mean? From a third party, your wife should be on the cover of Fit Pregnancy magazine.
Mm.
Well, it was, but I don't know, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 10 days. I don't exactly know, when that last OB visit was. Um, but the morning of January 4th, 2012, I had taken our two dogs out for a walk. We lived in a townhouse that did not have a yard, so we had to take our pets out for a walk. I take them out every morning. I come back in, and my wife is standing in the kitchen crying, and I knew something was up. And I said to her, I was like, "What's going on?" And she says, "I haven't felt him move since last night." So we call the doula, birthing coach that we were using. She says, go immediately to labor and delivery at the hospital. We go there, and three different ultrasound techs, three different ultrasound machines, and then a medical doctor all checked for a heartbeat. And it was the medical doctor who, of course, told us, quote, "I'm sorry to tell you this, but your baby no longer has a heartbeat," end quote. So Luke, our firstborn son, died somewhere in the night of January 3rd or early morning hours of January 4th. We find out that he is dead on January 4th. Not that many hours after that, my wife is induced and she delivers our firstborn son on January 5th. Luke was 6 pounds, 8 ounces, 21 inches long. He was 39 weeks gestationally out of a 40-week pregnancy. We were literally 1 week from his due date. And our first pregnancy ended in a full-term stillbirth. And that changed everything.
Did the doctors have any idea of what possibly had gone wrong during the pregnancy? Because it seems like this happened just snap of a finger.
Yeah. So the answer to that is a bit of yes and no. Okay. So the obstetrician and the folks at the hospital, shortly after Luke was born, had no idea. Um, the other obstetricians that we went to subsequently, or at least one of them, had a belief that the cord or the fluid in the cord, the umbilical cord, had clotted, which essentially meant that Luke basically suffocated. Like the kid, babies in utero are not breathing, right? They're not breathing air like we're breathing air, but they're getting all of that through the umbilical cord. And so it seems as if it was a cord clot, and we're not quite sure what caused that. We've had other pregnancies since then that have been successful and healthy. But the best way for me to answer that, dude, is God took Luke's life to bring us into relationship with him. So you talk, about kind of like the full truth here on this podcast, and that's it. Like, up to that point, I wanted to keep God as far away from me and as far away from my wife as possible. And it was our plan that we were going to start a family at that point in our lives. And God interrupted all of that and ultimately brought us into relationship with him. Now, the way in which that went down was I had no choice, as far as I was concerned, on the floor of the hospital to cry out to him for help and mercy. And that was a point, though, in our lives where I could have shaken my fist at him. I could have been super angry. And I didn't. And the only explanation that I have for that is his grace. Because in some ways, you could argue I had every right to be upset. And I certainly had lots of grief, but we ran to him. I ran to him. My wife was one minuscule step behind me. Like we ran to him. And the only thing that I can attribute that to is his grace. So we felt like Noah, we had a Luke shaped hole in our heart. That is what the grief was. And what God showed us by us beginning to be in relationship with him was that we didn't have a Luke shaped hole, we had a God shaped hole. And what he did was he loved us through the grief, filled the God shaped hole, and has blessed us since. And it's not like this, amazing turning point. It's been very much a ongoing relationship, of one where we've submitted our lives to him, looked to him for direction and guidance and wisdom and all of that kind of stuff. And some of the blessings are 18 months after Luke was delivered, we had our first living child. And then 5.5 years after that, we were blessed with identical twin boys born in January. And that was 7 years after Luke's death in January. And it was really neat how all of that went down, where basically we wanted to get pregnant and avoid, if at all possible, delivering in the month of January. And we got pregnant with a February due date. And the February due date was based on 40 weeks gestational. And that is true for one kid. But when you're beyond 35 and when you have twins, they force them out early. So the due date went from February to January. And all of that we can see now. We could see it then as well. But when they were born, all of that was God's design. He was like, you tried to control things. It's not yours to control. I am redeeming Luke's death. You will celebrate Luke in January, but you will celebrate living birthdays in January as well.
If all this hadn't have happened to you, like losing your newborn and as well as the avalanche, where do you think your life would be today?
Very, 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 very likely, Noah, I am on a second or third marriage, or I'm single, having been divorced from my wife, because what I never was up until I began to have a relationship with God and with Jesus and with the Holy Spirit was I wasn't a man. So I didn't even begin the process of becoming a man until I was 31 years old, which is when Luke died. Up to that point, man, all I am is essentially a selfish, overgrown child. And so I treated my wife poorly because I treated myself amazingly. I was selfish, and, I did nice things for her when it benefited me, not when it benefited her, just as an example. So my behavior pattern, had it not changed, would have very likely ended in divorce. Maybe I get remarried. You know what I mean? Like it just, it would have been bad, dude. It would have been bad. And praise God, it's not.
For people that are listening to this story and they, maybe if they've experienced something in the past where they've just don't know where to turn and don't know what to do, what advice would you give to them on what to do during a very difficult time?
Yeah. Well, I first want to acknowledge that those times are very difficult. Um, I'm saying with a smile things that are really positive. Like we had twins years later, but there was a lot of pain and a lot of heartache in between. Lots of really, 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 really low points. So I'm using that as the preface to say that while I haven't necessarily experienced the exact thing that your listener may have, I've been in some incredibly low points, incredibly low. And my advice, since you're asking, is that I would get on my physical knees and I would cry out to God, even if you don't believe in him, but you think maybe there's a God, and see what he might do in response to you pouring your heart out to him. And what I mean by pouring your heart out would be give him everything you've got. If you are fired up and all you've got in your heart is a whole bunch of 4-letter words and maybe a whole bunch of questions of why, or why me, or something along those lines, it has been my experience that he can handle that and that he will respond because he has responded to me in those instances. And it's been quite wild that when I have been completely raw and prayed prayers that are unlike anything a modern church would think is acceptable to pray, but where I have truly let my anger towards God be known to him, or my frustration with life known to him, he's been able to handle it. And he's even responded and given me direction, which has provided comfort to me.
Well, Meg, I've appreciated you so much for coming on here and sharing this story. It's such a touching story to hear. Um, I can't imagine what you've been through. I've never been in any of these scenarios, but just from the way you tell it, people can honestly know exactly what you've been through, and it shows a lot of strength and courage to come on podcasts like this and be able to share the story over and over again. So I have to give you a lot of strength and, a lot of props to you to be able to come on here and share this story. I really have appreciated it. If people would like to learn maybe more about you and would like to maybe check out your podcast and just follow you and connect with you, where all are you available at?
Yeah. Thanks, Noah. Well, first off, man, all glory be to God for everything that I've said and for the kind words that you've said. For those that want to pay a little bit more attention to what we've got going on in my world, it would be whenyoulook.com, or you can grab us on any of the podcast platforms, including YouTube, which is going to be at When You Look Show. You can get all of that through whenyoulook.com. So both of those are a great place to start.
I'll put links to his website as well as some social media, and I'll also link his podcast down there as well, so that it's all easy access for you guys to find. But if you are having trouble still, just go to his website. You'll learn and see all the information there. Feel free to follow me on social media as well. Instagram and TikTok at Lethal Venom Podcast. Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. It's Noah's Podcast. And feel free to follow Lethal Venom wherever you get your podcast from. I'm on all the major platforms: Spotify, Apple, Amazon, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Pandora. It's everywhere. So feel free to follow and subscribe to it so that you get notified when new episodes come out. thank you all for tuning in to today's episode, and thank you all for listening. Y'all have a great rest of your day. Be safe, and I'll catch you on the next episode of Lethal Venom.